And welcome to Inside Olympia. The baby boomers are retiring and the younger generations have different expectations about work. The COVID pandemic led to the Great Resignation, and now public and private sector employers are struggling to find enough workers. So what can lawmakers do about this workforce shortage? In our second half, we'll talk with legislators about efforts to streamline professional licensing. Joining me first to talk about workforce issues generally and solutions is State Representative Vandana Slatter, the Democratic Chair of the House Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Committee, and State Representative Alex Ybarra, the ranking Republican on that committee. Welcome, both of you to Inside Olympia. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Austin.
So, I've said at the beginning, and I'll say it again, you could go to any state in this country and talk to state legislators and ask them, what are three big issues you're thinking about, worrying about, talking about? And I can almost guarantee that one of them would be workforce. So as you sit here and you think about the role of this committee and you think about what's happening in 2023, how would you size up or describe the issue that we're confronted with, whether it's the public sector or the private sector?
Thank you so much for the question and for the issue as a highlight. I think in your opening remarks, you named a number of things that I think are leading to the workforce shortage issue. And I think what's important for people to realize is that this did not happen overnight, and it is multifactorial in nature. And therefore, it seems like it's easy to say, it's kind of like saying homelessness is a monolith, workforce shortage is a monolith. It's not, because I can tell you, even if you just look at nursing, for example, they have been dealing with a shortage for the last 10 years if you ask them. But I think what's interesting, and in your comments as well, is the pandemic has sort of exacerbated some of these shortages with mass retirements, for example, with closures that happen, and staff burnout, for example. So addressing all of these issues requires a multifactorial approach and an understanding of context that requires that. I think in the post-secondary education world, we have a role to play, and we've done some really critical legislation in allowing for financial aid. And I can expand on this, but I would say we look at this in three different buckets. Okay. One is from a pipeline standpoint, one is from a ready force standpoint, and one is from a sustainability and resilience sort of retention standpoint. And I think we have different pieces of legislation and different partnerships that we can build to address that. But before I go into any of that detail, just to underscore the multifactorial nature of this is just to say that, we have been under siege by a virus, frankly. When you think about having come out of a battle of sorts or emerging from a battle, it requires some recovery and some time. And this is a decade after we were in a recession that I think we have just sort of recently come out of. So I think being an understanding that we have to look forward in a way that allows people to have that pathway to recovery and recognizes the challenges and the barriers that they face is kind of one of the places I find myself when looking at legislation.
This is an issue that, as you say, it transcends public and private sector, the types of professions. There's no kind of one silver bullet to solve this issue. And then there's also an urban-rural component. You represent a district in central Washington, an ag industry part of our state as well. So as you're thinking about this, both as a Republican from central Washington, but then also just more broadly, how are you sizing up the problem?
Well, I think that the chair, the reason we're doing so well in the chair and passing all these bills, the workforce bills, is because we have a wonderful chair. And as you can tell from her beginning speech, that's where we're at. And so she's doing a wonderful job. But from my standpoint in Eastern Washington, I didn't even know there was a workforce issue. Everybody kind of knew about it, but it wasn't a big issue that I was seeing when we came to Olympia. But all summer long, what I was working on was a pre-apprenticeship bill. A pre-apprenticeship bill that starts in the high school, because I was on the ranking on K-12. And that particular bill was trying to get kids to get into apprenticeship programs and the nursery program, certificate programs at the high school level. So I worked all summer long with L&I, worked with the unions, with the school districts, with all the ESDs, education service districts folks, got language together in order to pass that pre-apprenticeship bill. Well, when I got to Olympia in November and December, I changed committees, and now I'm the ranking on post-secondary, which is wonderful. But the good thing is we started the workforce issues at the high school level, and now I'm on post-secondary and working to get those issues taken care of. And for the pre-apprenticeship bill, a lot of those pre-apprenticeship bills are for the ag communities. We have a lot of things that the John Deere tractors, the soil sciences that are happening right now, all of the new ag symbiosis is happening across Eastern Washington is all happening, but we have to have somebody to do that work. And
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I know your leader, J.T. Wilcox, has also talked about, and I think part of why he wanted you on in this role is he's also talked about the growing Latino workforce in this state. Sure. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to, again, your district, your particular part of the state, and what have you identified particular needs around supporting that workforce?
Well, I don't think the workforce has changed much, but it's just the direction we're going to take that particular workforce. So obviously I'm Hispanic. I was a migrant worker back when I grew up, and so were my parents. And so the only jobs that we usually take, just because most of us were uneducated, we are just labor. We're farm worker labor, and so that's where we're at. And if your dad is a carpenter, you become a carpenter. If you're a farm worker, you become a farm worker. But with all the work that I've been doing, I think that we can get that workforce that's strong, hardworking, and get them into the fields where they can actually make a difference in this world, and not just doing labor, but doing skilled labor. And I think that these bills that are passing are going to be able to get those folks, the Hispanic folks in Eastern Washington, into the workforce, which is what we need. We just need to get them skilled into the areas where we need them.
Yeah, and I hear you also saying get kids at a younger age thinking about their career pathways.
Right.
100%.
Now, this issue cuts across many committees in the state legislature, and obviously the state alone can't solve this. But as you're thinking about a strategic approach to this session, which is kind of flying by, right?
Yeah.
You're already a month in. Where do you begin, or if you want to be focused here and try to have the biggest impact, what are a couple of things you think the committee and the legislature broadly can do this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, if you think about pipeline, we need to have an understanding of where is our workforce coming from and how can we address that. And I just want to, thank Ranking Member Ybarra for being a great partner and for bringing forth his voice for people in his district and around the state, as well as his lived experience. Because our opportunity and our crisis are kind of commingled a little bit. One of the things I was surprised to learn is that we have one of the lowest direct to college high school rates, high school direct to college enrollment rates. We're like 48th in the nation. We're 10 points at least below the nation in achieving a post-secondary credential of any kind by the age of 26, and our goal is to get to 70%. We are 49th on the list of states for filling out FAFSA, which is the gateway for financial aid. And we have one of the most generous and equitable financial aid packages possibilities in the nation. So you can go free to college if you're low income in this state.
Before you kind of continue that thought, is there a reason, have you identified a reason why we would rank so low, especially because I think people would think, oh, Washington State is a tech state, it's a West Coast state. Right. You would think we would be in the top quartile in most of those indicators.
Well, I think that we certainly bring in a lot of people who do work in the state and have access to high demand degrees. I don't know that there's actually one answer to that. I think part of it is, as Representative Ybarra said, we have low-income, rural, underrepresented students, first-generation students who don't see themselves in these spaces and see these roles as elitist, perhaps, to get a high-wage job with an advanced degree. And then the barriers are financial, but they're also, social, and and we have to find ways to give people the opportunity to be able to access that. I always like to say that you shouldn't have to be a superhero to get an education. But in many cases, we are starting to see basic needs as a barrier even. And in the pandemic, we saw people leave the college environment in order to work to be able to support their families. Most people don't know the average age of a community technical college student is 27. So, and a number of those people have children, their families. So to your question about where do we see a priority, it seems kind of sort of unusual to say that we actually see a priority in post-secondary basic needs and the ability for giving people that opportunity to access the degrees and the fields and the skills that they need. We have more young people aspiring to go to college than at any time in history, but wealthier students and those with a financial safety net have 5 times greater the chance of actually achieving a credential than those at low income. So as a legislature, as a post-secondary education committee, we can actually play a role in that. And so some of our legislation is in fact directed that way and continued to do that. The other thing we can do is our committee remit has changed a little bit to expand to healthcare workforce. We know that there's a huge crisis, behavioral health care, nursing, and all different types of behavioral credentials that I am learning about.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them, and then there's nursing, and there's vocational and apprenticeship programs too that actually need help and support. And we want to give everyone a chance to find that meaningful work and that path to self-sufficiency. And it doesn't have to look like a college degree. So also finding all of those pathways. So we have been working pretty closely, I think, in developing those options for students as well. And then, you know, the certifications and what you'll hear about with respect to licensing, streamlining that.
And for the communities that I live in, it's language. It's all about language. We're not black and white over on the other side of the mountains. We're white and brown. And brown means you speak Spanish. And 30% of the kids in my schools don't speak English at all. So they start with, way back, not even able to read anything. So when it comes to education, they're already way back in their education and never catch up many a time. So it's everything that the chair said, but also the language in my communities. And I'm guessing across the Western Washington as well.
So as you think about some of the solutions, you've identified pre-apprenticeships as something that you're particularly passionate about and have been working on. What are some other tools? Because we have expanded access to higher ed through the expanded need grant in this state. We've been talking for years about trying to better mirror the programs in the community colleges with what the workforce needs are. What are some other examples of what you or House Republicans are thinking about in terms of potential solutions here?
Sure. Well, we have 34 community and technical colleges in the state of Washington. So right now we're looking for an appropriation of $77 million to help the workforce programs that those particular technical colleges have and the community colleges. Right now, most of those classes, because they're welding and you only have so many students in there, so the cost of teaching those kids is high, plus all of the materials needed and all the equipment needed to teach those particular skills to a particular workforce is very expensive. So we think that the $77 million to the community colleges and technical colleges is going to go a long way to keep those programs up and running and get more seats in those programs.
So that's about keeping them running, but also about expanding the number of slots.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that there's a bigger pipeline.
Yes.
Okay. There's an interesting example in Rhode Island where they've got Electric Boat, the company that builds boats, and they have a workforce issue. And so what the legislators there are thinking about specifically this is what prompted me to think about this, was welding. They know we need X number more welders coming up through the ranks in order to staff Electric Boat, which is a major employer in their state. We've obviously got Boeing. And,
100%.
We're seeing a lot of layoffs happening right now, but we also know that those future aerospace workers pipeline is an issue. So is there an example in this state that would be analogous to what I just described in Rhode Island, where they're thinking about a specific company or a specific sector and trying to meet the demand for the future?
Well, when we passed the Washington College Grant Bill, that was 2158, that allowed B&O taxes to be used directly for higher education. And part of that was the college grant that was the state need grant, but then became the Washington College Grant. But part of that was to actually get more faculty to teach welding and nursing. So we did actually look to, do we have enough educators? But to your specific,
issue, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't train the the workforce of the future if you don't have the people to train them. Right?
In my district, the college that does that work is the students are pulled out by industry faster than they can even graduate. It's really amazing. But to your point, I have a bill this year for Climate Corps, which is basically two pieces to that bill. One is a service corps for people who are veterans or students who are interested in conservation and climate action, but also to get some training and learning about renewable energy jobs or sustainable green types of jobs. The second part of that bill is actually a task force, an advisory group made up primarily of labor and business and other entities to look at how do we transition the workforce into this new renewable age, because we just passed some pretty big legislation in climate, right? Climate Commitment Act, low carbon fuel standard, and to your point, with electric vehicles and possibly boats, we need people who will be able to set up this grid, this infrastructure that is going to be new. So that's one bill that contemplates that. But to your point, we also need our educators to look like our students as well, to Rep. Ybarra's point. And so understanding how we can actually create a workforce of educators is also something that's on our mind.
Is there something that can be done around this language barrier you identify and helping, and you tell a personal story about growing up, if I remember correctly, being in elementary school, not being able to read, and a teacher who took an interest in you, and it changed everything for you. But we're so focused on like the high school. Maybe if we get to the kids in high school and get them thinking about a career, then we're doing better than we are today. But what about that elementary school kid who's already starting out with a, I don't want to say it's a disadvantage, but a potential barrier?
Right. Well, it's easy answer. It's dual language bill that was passed this year. So I'm co-sponsor on that particular bill. I worked dual language about 4 years ago. With OSPI before I was a legislator, and know all about how dual language programs would work. The problem we had at the time was that one was money, but the other one was we didn't have enough teachers that spoke the different languages.
Right.
So, for instance, in my school, Quincy, we had 3 or 4 teachers that could speak the language and maybe do a dual language class at the kindergarten level, then first and second and third. But you have to go all the way to 12. So we only have enough teachers for 6 grades out of 12, so then the kids kind of lose out a year,
slip, right?
then it starts to slip.
Yeah.
So without those teachers, we can't do it. So, but this year, now that we've got more and more teachers per some bills that we passed in the past, we've got more teachers that speak the language of the kids, where they're coming from, be it Russian or English or Spanish, Chinese, whatever it is. We've got those particular teachers coming into dual language. And if we can teach them there, not only is it good for kids that speak the different language, it's also for kids that speak English. They can be in those classes. They intermingle and they speak with other kids and they work together to learn the Spanish language or the French language, whatever it might be, and they learn together. And those particular kids usually come out of school and they have better grades than most kids. So that's going to start to happen. I think that's going to be the first common pieces that we're going to get the kids that speak a different language where they can really succeed in school at a much quicker rate than they are now, or they were in the past, like myself.
Right.
If I could add to that, I mean, we're in a global economy, right? We're in an economy we're working remotely.
Yeah.
So having access to different languages and understanding different cultures is pretty crucial and vital, I think, for success in our world. And one of the things that this brought up is that WASAC, the higher ed agency for our state, the Washington Student Achievement Council, has been working as a sort of a pilot, these challenge grants, these regional challenge grants. That was one of their ideas was to try to see if we could get more students to fill out the FAFSA, which is that form that allows them to access financial aid. A lot of people don't know about it or they don't hear about it. It's a pretty complicated form and need help. Yeah, I mean, I look at it and I think it's pretty daunting. And the federal government has been trying to actually simplify it. But these challenge grants, the idea is to provide dollars to community organizations who are trusted messengers for students. And similar to what Rep. Ybarra is saying, maybe someone who speaks the same language, understands your culture and your background, could perhaps be that bridge to you wanting to try something new or to expand your career, your skills. So I think that's really powerful as well. We don't know if it will do the trick, but I think these are the types of ideas that we are looking forward to seeing, how they might actually advance pathways and accessibility and not disenfranchising people.
To what extent is there a financial piece here, either in terms of if we're talking about the state
100%.
and it's, the provider rates it pays, how does that fit into? this?
Yeah, I mean, we have some great people, great legislators, Representative Macri, for example, who has been a great leader in looking at increasing Medicaid rates for services, because frankly, if you want to be in a profession but you can't make a living or live sustainably in that profession, we are so lucky to have such amazing people who choose caregiving of all different kinds as their purpose in life. And we want to acknowledge that that is an incredibly important skill set, and that they go through a lot of education and training in order to receive. And so that reimbursement is pretty important, you know, in the end. And so working on that end of it is actually very powerful. One other way we try to do that when we can't see that path as being totally achievable or can't get enough dollars there is we're looking at loan repayment, for example. So we have the Washington Health Corps, which offers loan repayment if you are willing to work in a rural or urban underserved area in certain fields, particularly in behavioral health. So you'll see a lot of investment in that space. And we just heard about conditional scholarships today. Conditional scholarships are sort of that, loan repayment is when you've already sort of taken the degree, you've taken out a loan and you can get it forgiven. So you gain actually dollars per month because you don't have to pay those extra student loan dollars. Conditional scholarship is if we're trying to encourage you to go into a field and we're giving you a scholarship, but there are conditions associated with it.
So you get the money in the front end,
So you get
but then
the money.
you have to
Yeah,
fulfill these
correct.
obligations.
There's been some barriers to that, and people haven't really taken advantage of that.
Right.
And so this bill that we heard today from Representative Eslick and Representative Levitt was one to try to address that solution, that problem.
Is there anything, I mentioned at the beginning, this sort of changing culture of work and different expectations of younger generations and employers having to flex to that. Do you think there's a role for public policymakers to deal with that kind of changing workforce environment?
I think it's just kind of happening. It's just kind of just rolling right now. I think the legislature, when I first got here 4 years ago, we hardly spoke about workforce. We knew it was an issue. It came up every once in a while, but all of a sudden it's just kind of rolling in that direction. I think it's not only at the legislative level, it's also at the worker level. It's also at the employer level,
right,
at the union levels. They're all changing. They're all seeing the changes that are happening in our world, just to, you know, one due to COVID and the other one's due to energy, Clean Air Act. And so they can see it coming, and I think everybody's starting to jump on board and starting to get that wheel rolling to get us to the right place.
There's emergency.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there, to what extent are there barriers to some of these solutions because of the way we've always done things versus the way we might need to do them in the future? And I'm interested, for instance, when you have these hearings, are you finding that it's hard to get unanimity on a path forward because you've got issues around licensure and who does what, right? Or unions being concerned about some of the provisions?
Yeah. So I guess I can answer
Sure.
that. You know, that we have a bill in front of us. It's a nurses union compact, and so there is something that the nurses unions aren't really wanting to push that forward, but we do need the nurses. We all know we have a shortage of nurses in all our hospitals.
And this is, just so we're clear, the compact is you kind of join with other states and recognize licensure in another state if they come here.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so there's some issues with that, and we're trying to work out the issues, and that's one of my priorities I'd like to pass. But again, it's something that we have to work with all the parties and make sure that, you know, the unions and the folks that work in the hospitals are okay with the bill before it passes. But that's something that we're kind of working out. But the other compacts that we talked about before, the speech language therapist, the dentist, the dental therapist, they've all passed free and clear.
The mental health compact as well. I think with the nursing compact and even with social work licensure that we had discussions today, the balance is between safety and speed of credentialing. In some places, I think we have had some, slow movement on allowing credentialing to be accessible to more people and to have access to workforce from different states. But on the other hand, we also have to be very clear about is there a safety concern? And can we address safety? Because sometimes you speed forward during a crisis and then you have to sort of pull back because somebody gets hurt or something happens. And as a healthcare professional, I'm not practicing now, but I have a license as a pharmacist. It's really important to me that when I work with other pharmacists or physicians or nurses that they are well trained, that they understand exactly what they're doing, and that ultimately the patient is the most important, that the outcome is what we hope to achieve. So I do think there's a balance, and I'm always listening for that balance, so that it makes sense.
What is the Seattle Times just did a story about people who are trying to get licensed as psychologists in this state, and so that's part of the mental health sector. We have a shortage of workers, but they're coming in and they can't. There's just a backlog. So by the Seattle Times stats were that there's 400 people in queue who are ready to go, but they can't get their license, and that's up from 389 last year. How do you address those issues?
I mean, I think that when you think about workforce shortage, there's also a workforce shortage in government, right? And in regulatory spaces too. So, I mean, I can't say that that's exactly the reason for this, but I can imagine that might be the case as well. So, we're trying to figure out how to address all of these things that are impacting us in at different levels, right? In different capacities.
And it's funny that you brought that up, just because I was a school board member before I became a legislator, and when I was working for the school district, one of the things that we couldn't find in Eastern Washington was a psychologist. And it was like, who did we get? We got a contract with one person that lived in Seattle. We paid him for his travel, and he would work for maybe 4 hours because it took him 3 hours to come and go back home. And we paid him just tons of money, and I can't remember the exact amount, but it was a lot of money per day, and that's the only person that would come to our school district to do any work.
I mean, I think that's really interesting because during the pandemic, we sort of experienced a shortage as well. But 50% of our counties do not have a psychiatrist, for example, which is deeply concerning. And so what we did was we looked at telemedicine and telehealth, which is not optimal, but at least it's some approach to addressing this issue. Right. And so we have to also look at other professions because the ARNP, the nurse practitioners, they have the ability to prescribe, which is something that psychiatrists have that maybe some psychologists don't, although they're working in that direction, right? So we have some money in the budget perhaps to go towards developing that type of program or offering more slots for ARNPs who can do psychiatric work. So that type of approach, so PAs like physician assistants and dental therapists, which has always been a controversial issue in the legislature, but we just did a compact for dental hygienists and dentists. So sort of trying to find new ways to use, how professions sort of work with each other to support one another and overlap might be also one approach. And then bringing back some retirees who might have left the profession, and then how then could we have them come and support different spaces? I mean, we've certainly seen it in education with substitute teachers, things like that. So,
well, we are out of time, but I'd like to just wrap up by giving you each an opportunity to kind of give a reality check. I mean, you've established the scope of the problem and the fact that we didn't get here overnight. This was built over a number of years. But what would if you're speaking to constituents, speaking to the public, you can make some progress this year probably, but what's the reality of this workforce problem?
Well, I've been pleasantly surprised working on this particular committee, post-secondary and workforce. Again, because of the chair for lots of reasons, but we're making a lot of progress. I mean, I can't believe how many compacts we've passed, bills that we've passed. The things that we're passing right now they're just flowing through. I think both sides of the aisle are working together to fulfill the goal of getting a workforce in place, because that's what we need. And I think we're working very closely together, closer than I've ever seen it, together to get all these things passed. So I think we're really making a lot of progress. Nobody's seen them yet because those bills have not passed. But when they do, I think you're going to see lots of progress over the next couple of years.
Thank you. You've been a great partner, Representative Ybarra, and you bring a lived experience as well as a learned experience from your experience in education that has been very valuable for our committee. And we have been trying to understand this world because the Post-Secondary Education Workforce Committee has been pretty much higher ed and apprenticeships, and now has expanded a little bit to healthcare, credentialing, et cetera, which is definitely a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I think that's what I would say to the public, is that we are fully committed as a legislature, I think, to addressing this workforce shortage in ways that are thoughtful, to build resiliency amongst our workforce, but also to see people, to see everybody in our state as having access to meaningful work and self-sufficiency, because I think that some of the systems have not seen everyone, and we need everyone at this point, all hands on deck. And so that's kind of the approach that we're taking. And the solutions don't seem like what you'd expect, but I think that they're going to help us move forward. And we also want to really listen to people as well and to understand kind of where they see themselves and what can we do as a legislator to help support the direction that people would like to go.
Okay, and nothing like a crisis to bring D's and R's
Exactly.
together, right?
I think it's a human problem, right?
Yep.
So.
Well, Chair Slatter and Ranking Member Ybarra, thank you so much for talking about this.